Zyra's entire body ached as she knelt on the cold metal floor of the cargo hold. The chains around her wrists were too tight, cutting into her violet fur and leaving dark stains where they'd rubbed her skin raw. She'd stopped trying to adjust them hours ago. What was the point? In a few more hours, maybe less, she'd be dead anyway. The cargo hold stank of fear and despair. It was a smell she'd grown familiar with over the past 6 years of captivity, but tonight it seemed worse. Heavier. More final. Around her, other prisoners sat in similar chains, their eyes empty and distant. A Veldari male, his crystalline body cracked and dim, muttered prayers to gods that had abandoned them long ago. A massive Thraken warrior, the kind who could tear apart steel with his bare hands, simply stared at the floor with his shoulders slumped. Even the strong ones had given up. Zyra understood why. The Korgoth didn't just kill you. They made a show of it. They'd drag you into their fighting pits while thousands watched and cheered. They'd place bets on how long you'd last. And then they'd release something horrible, something with too many teeth and claws, and you'd die screaming while the galaxy's so-called civilized species applauded your suffering. She'd seen it happen to others. Now it was her turn. Her ears twitched at the sound of approaching footsteps. Heavy ones. The distinctive click of Korgoth claws on metal. The guards were coming early. Her heart began to race despite her attempts to stay calm. She'd promised herself she wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her afraid, but her body betrayed her with trembling hands and rapid breathing. The door hissed open and 3 Korgoth guards entered, their reptilian faces twisted in what passed for amusement among their kind. The leader was Vexthor, the ship's security commander. He was massive even by Korgoth standards, his scales scarred from countless battles, one eye replaced with a glowing red implant that tracked movement with predatory precision. "The little kitten is awake," Vexthor hissed, his voice like gravel scraping against stone. "Good. The commander wants you conscious for what comes next. He's planned something special." Zyra forced herself to meet his gaze, though every instinct screamed at her to lower her eyes in submission. She was Felixian. Her people had once been proud, had once roamed free on their forest world under 3 moons. That was before the Korgoth came. Before the orbital bombardment. Before her entire civilization was reduced to ashes and slaves. "Nothing to say, little kitten?" Vexthor leaned closer, his breath hot and rancid. "You had plenty to say 3 days ago when you tried to free the others. Such brave words about freedom and dignity and resistance." He laughed, a horrible sound that made the other prisoners flinch. "Where's that bravery now?" Zyra's claws extended involuntarily, a defensive reflex she couldn't control. Vexthor noticed and laughed harder. "Oh yes, show me those tiny claws. Perhaps we'll let you keep them when we throw you in the pit. Give you a fighting chance. It makes the show more entertaining when the prey thinks it can win." One of the other guards kicked a food bowl across the floor. Rancid scraps splashed against the wall. "Eat up, kitten. You'll need your strength." They left, their laughter echoing down the corridor. The door sealed shut with a finality that made Zyra's stomach twist. She looked down at her chains again, at her small hands that had once been so quick and nimble. As a child, she'd been training to become a pathfinder, one of the elite scouts of her people. She could climb any tree, leap any gap, move through the forest without making a sound. Those skills had helped her survive 6 years of slavery, had helped her avoid the worst punishments by staying useful and invisible. But 3 days ago she'd made a choice. She tried to pick the locks on the other prisoners' chains. She tried to organize an escape. And she'd failed. Now she'd pay the price. Zyra closed her eyes and tried to remember home. The smell of silver bark trees. The sound of wind through triple canopy forests. Her mother's voice singing the old songs. But the memories were fading, worn thin by years of horror. Sometimes she wondered if any of it had been real, or if her entire childhood was just a dream she'd invented to cope with the nightmare of her reality. She whispered a prayer to the old mothers, the ancient guardians her people had believed watched over them. She didn't know if they were real, if they'd ever been real, but it brought her comfort to pretend someone was listening. "Let it be quick," she murmured. "Please just let it be quick." The ship's engines thrummed beneath her, a constant vibration that had become the background noise of her existence. They were in transit, heading toward the Korgoth homeworld where the grandest fighting pits waited. Where the most enthusiastic crowds gathered. Where deaths were broadcast across dozens of star systems as entertainment. Zyra opened her eyes one last time and looked around the cargo hold. At the broken prisoners who'd given up hope long before she had. At the walls that had contained so much suffering. At the future that held nothing but pain and darkness. She took a deep breath and closed her eyes again, preparing herself for the end. Then the entire ship lurched violently to one side. Zyra crashed against the wall, her chains yanking painfully. Emergency alarms began shrieking, red lights flashing throughout the cargo hold. The other prisoners looked up in confusion and fear. Explosion after explosion rocked the vessel. The lights flickered and died, plunging them into darkness broken only by emergency strips. Through the walls, Zyra could hear shouting, the distinctive crack of weapons fire, and something else. Voices. Strange voices shouting in a language she'd never heard before. Aggressive voices. Determined voices. Voices that somehow didn't sound like conquerors or slavers. They sounded angry. Righteously, furiously angry. And they were getting closer. The cargo hold door exploded inward with a deafening bang that made Zyra's ears ring. Smoke poured through the opening, and through it came figures in strange armor she'd never seen before. They moved fast, impossibly coordinated, their weapons raised and sweeping the room with practiced efficiency. Clear left, one of them shouted. 3 hostiles right side, another called out. The Korgoth guards who'd been stationed outside rushed in, raising their plasma rifles. They never got a chance to fire. The armored figures moved as one unit, their weapons barking in quick, controlled bursts. The guards dropped, their bodies hitting the floor with heavy thuds. It happened so fast that Zyra barely processed it. The Korgoth were supposed to be elite warriors, feared throughout the sector. These strangers had cut them down in seconds. Friendlies in the hold. The lead figure lowered his weapon and approached the chained prisoners. Multiple species, heavy restraints. Rodriguez, get the cutters up here now. Zyra pressed herself against the wall, her heart hammering. Were these new captors? Some rival faction come to steal the Korgoth's property? She'd heard stories of such things, slaves passing from one brutal master to another. The lead figure stopped a few feet away from her and slowly removed his helmet. Zyra's breath caught. The face beneath was like nothing she'd ever seen. Smooth skin, barely any fur except on the top of his head and above his eyes. His features were arranged in an oddly flat way, and his eyes were a strange brown color that seemed to hold both hardness and something else. Something almost gentle. Hey there, he said, his voice softer now. My name's Brett. We're humans from Earth. We're here to get you out. Zyra didn't respond. She couldn't. The translator her previous masters had implanted wasn't recognizing his language properly, giving her only fragments of meaning. Brett seemed to understand the problem. He reached slowly to his belt and pulled out a small device, holding it up so she could see it. Translator. Universal model. I'm going to attach it to your collar, okay? It won't hurt. He moved slowly, telegraphing every motion, and clipped the device to the metal band around her neck. It hummed for a moment, then his next words came through clearly. Can you understand me now? Zyra nodded, still too stunned to speak. Good. We're going to get those chains off you and then we're getting everyone off this ship. But I need you to trust me. Can you do that? Trust. The word felt foreign. Zyra hadn't trusted anyone in 6 years. Trust got you killed or disappointed or both. But something about the way this human looked at her, the way his eyes met hers without the predatory gleam she was used to, made her want to believe. Another human ran up, smaller than Brett, with darker skin and kind eyes visible through her raised helmet visor. Got the cutters, boss. Good. Start with her. Brett gestured to Zyra. The woman named Rodriguez knelt beside her. This is going to get hot for a second, but I'll be careful. What's your name, sweetheart? Zyra, she whispered, her voice hoarse from disuse. Pretty name. Okay, Zyra, hold real still for me. The plasma cutter hissed to life, and Rodriguez worked with surprising delicacy, cutting through the chains without touching Zyra's skin. The moment the restraints fell away, Zyra rubbed her raw wrists, unable to believe she was actually free. Even if only for a moment. Around the cargo hold, more humans were freeing the other prisoners. Zyra watched in amazement as they treated each species with the same care, the same respect. The Veldari, the Thraken, even the small pickets who were considered worthless by most galactic standards. The humans showed no favoritism, no hierarchy. Lieutenant, we've got a problem. A voice crackled through Brett's comm device. The Korgoth captain activated the self-destruct. We've got 3 minutes, maybe 4? Brett cursed, a word that needed no translation to understand its meaning. He turned to his team. Everyone, we're leaving now. Help the ones who can't walk. The humans moved with renewed urgency, hoisting injured prisoners over their shoulders, guiding the weak ones toward the door. Brett approached Zyra again, extending his hand. We need to move fast. Can you run? Zyra stared at his outstretched hand. It was an invitation, not a command. A request, not an order. For 6 years, no one had asked her anything. They'd only ever told her what to do, usually with violence backing up their words. She took his hand. His grip was firm but not crushing, warm through his glove. He helped her to her feet, and Zyra was surprised to find that despite her time in chains, her legs still worked. Brett kept hold of her hand as they ran through the corridor, his team ahead and behind, protecting the freed prisoners in the middle. The ship was chaos. More Korgoth were trying to stop them, but the humans fought with a ferocity that seemed impossible for beings who didn't look particularly strong or armored. They used tactics Zyra had never seen, covering each other, moving in patterns that left no gaps, communicating constantly through their devices. 30 seconds to the shuttle bay, someone shouted. They burst through another door into a massive hangar where a sleek vessel waited, its ramp lowered. Humans were waving them forward, providing covering fire as more Korgoth appeared from side corridors. Go, go, go. Brett pushed Zyra toward the ramp but stayed behind, his weapon raised. Zyra stumbled up the ramp, her legs shaking. Inside the shuttle, more humans were helping prisoners into seats, strapping them in, checking for injuries. The efficiency was staggering. Every human knew exactly what to do, worked together like a single organism. She found a seat and looked back toward the ramp. Brett and his team were still fighting, still holding the line so everyone else could escape. One of them went down, took a plasma bolt to the shoulder, but 2 others dragged him aboard without missing a beat. Brett was the last one up the ramp, firing behind him as it began to close. We're aboard. Punch it. The shuttle engines roared to life, and Zyra felt the acceleration push her back into her seat. Through a viewport, she saw the Korgoth ship receding, and then a massive explosion tore through its midsection. The vessel broke apart in a cascade of secondary detonations, debris scattering into the void. The cargo hold where she'd been chained, where she'd been preparing to die, was gone. Vaporized. Zyra's hands were shaking. Her whole body was shaking. She'd been seconds away from death, and these strangers, these humans, had risked their lives to save her. To save all of them. Brett moved through the shuttle, checking on his team and the rescued prisoners. When he reached Zyra, he crouched down so they were eye level. You okay? Zyra couldn't find words. Her throat was tight, her eyes burning with emotions she'd suppressed for years. She managed a small nod. Brett smiled, and it transformed his face from that of a warrior into something else. Something warm. Good. We're taking you somewhere safe. Our ship, the Redeemer. Our doctors will check everyone over, get you fed and cleaned up. And then we'll figure out where you want to go. Why? The word burst from Zyra before she could stop it. Why did you save us? We're nothing to you. We can't repay you. We have no value, no purpose, no. Brett held up a hand, stopping her. His expression grew serious. Your people. That's all the reason we need. Where we come from, on Earth, we believe every thinking being has value. Has rights. And nobody deserves to be property. Zyra stared at him. In all her years traveling the galaxy as a slave, she'd never heard anyone express such a philosophy. The strong ruled. The weak served. That was the law of the universe. Apparently, no one had told the humans that. And judging by the determination in Brett's eyes, they wouldn't have cared if someone had. The medical bay of the Redeemer was unlike anything Zyra had ever experienced. It was clean, almost painfully so after years in the filthy cargo holds of slave ships. The air smelled of antiseptic and something else. Something fresh that reminded her distantly of the forests of her homeworld. Soft lighting bathed everything in a gentle glow that didn't hurt her sensitive eyes. Zyra sat on an examination table, her legs dangling over the edge, while a human doctor worked on cleaning her wounds. His name was Nathan, and his hands were incredibly gentle as he applied something cool to the raw skin around her wrists where the chains had cut deep. This might sting a little, Nathan warned before dabbing the medicine on a particularly bad spot. Zyra flinched but didn't pull away. The sting faded quickly, replaced by a numbing sensation that actually felt good. You're going to be fine, Nathan said, attaching a scanner to her arm that beeped softly. Malnourished, dehydrated, some old injuries that healed wrong, but nothing we can't fix. You're tougher than you look. Zyra watched him work, still half convinced this was some elaborate dream or trick. The doctor showed no disgust at touching her, no impatience when she flinched at sudden movements, no cruelty in his eyes. He treated her like she mattered. Why did you save us? Zyra asked quietly. The question had been burning in her mind since they'd escaped. Nathan paused, genuinely surprised. Because you needed help. What other reason would we need? But we're nothing to you. Different species. No alliance, no trade agreements, no debt to repay. Zyra's ears flattened against her skull in confusion. In the galaxy, no one helps without expecting something in return. Before Nathan could respond, the medical bay door slid open and a tall human woman entered. She wore a different uniform than the others with more markings on the shoulders. Her hair was starting to gray at the temples, and her eyes had the sharp, calculating look of someone who'd commanded others for a long time. But when those eyes landed on Zyra, they softened. "Commander Grant," Nathan said, stepping back. "We're almost done here. Take your time, Doctor." The commander approached slowly, her movements deliberate and non-threatening. "I wanted to check on our guests personally. How are you feeling, Zyra?" The fact that she knew Zyra's name, that she'd bothered to learn it, was almost as shocking as the rescue itself. I don't understand," Zyra admitted. "Any of this." Commander Grant pulled up a chair and sat down, bringing herself to Zyra's eye level. It was a gesture of equality that made Zyra's breath catch. No one sat down for a slave. No one made themselves equal. "What don't you understand?" "You," Zyra said, her voice stronger now. "Your people. You attacked a Korgoth warship to free prisoners you didn't know existed until you boarded. You risked your lives. Some of your people were injured. For what? For us." Grant nodded slowly. "Yes, for you. For all the people trapped on that ship." "But why? We can offer you nothing. My people don't even exist anymore. The Korgoth burned my world 6 years ago. I have no home, no family, no resources to trade. I'm worthless in every way the galaxy measures worth." Grant's expression hardened, but not with anger at Zyra. With anger at the words themselves. "You're not worthless. You're a person. A thinking, feeling being with hopes and dreams and the right to live free. That's not worthless. That's everything." Zyra's claws dug into the edge of the examination table. "The galaxy doesn't work that way. The strong rule. The weak serve. That's how it's always been." "Well, humans are new to your galaxy," Grant said with a slight smile. "And we don't like your rules very much. Where we come from, we learned the hard way what happens when you sort people into categories of worthy and unworthy. We've spent thousands of years fighting wars over it, making mistakes, learning from them. And we decided that every sentient being deserves dignity and freedom. Period. No exceptions." Nathan finished bandaging Zyra's wrists and stepped back. "All done. I want you to eat something, rest, and come back tomorrow so I can check those ribs." "We're taking everyone home," Grant continued. "All the prisoners we freed. Where's your world? We'll get you there safely." The hope that had been building in Zyra's chest crumbled. "I told you. My world is gone. Destroyed. There's nowhere for me to go." Grant's jaw tightened, a muscle jumping in her cheek. "The Korgoth did that? 6 years ago. Orbital bombardment. They said we resisted too much, that we needed to learn our place. So they turned our forests into ash and our cities into glass. The survivors were taken as slaves." Zyra's voice was flat, emotionless. She cried all her tears for her homeworld years ago. "I was 12. Nathan's hands stilled on his medical equipment. Grant's eyes showed something Zyra had rarely seen directed at her situation. Pure righteous fury. "I'm sorry," Grant said quietly. "That should never have happened. And for what it's worth, the Korgoth are going to learn they made a serious mistake when they decided Earth wasn't worth their respect." "You can't fight them," Zyra said, her ears flattening. "They're too strong, too numerous. They've controlled this sector for 300 years. We'll see about that." Grant stood up. "But that's not your problem to worry about right now. You're welcome to stay with us as long as you need. We'll figure something out together." Over the next several days, Zyra explored the Redeemer. She expected to be confined to certain areas, to have restrictions placed on her movement. That's how it worked on every ship she'd ever been on. But the humans placed no such limits. She could go almost anywhere, and the crew she encountered simply nodded or smiled at her. Some even said hello. It was disorienting. She found herself in the common area one evening, watching the crew during their off-duty hours. Humans sat at tables playing games or eating meals together. But they weren't alone. A massive Thraken, one of the prisoners they'd freed, was arm wrestling with a human half his size while others cheered. A Veldari was teaching a group of humans a song from her world, their voices blending in harmony. 2 small pickets were perched on a human's shoulders, chattering excitedly while he showed them something on a data pad. There was no segregation. No hierarchy based on species or strength. Everyone was just equal. Brett found her there, standing in the doorway and staring. "Pretty different from a Korgoth ship, huh?" How do you make it work? Zyra asked. All these species, all these different needs and cultures. How do you keep order without someone being in charge, without someone being on top? Oh, someone's in charge, Brett said with a grin. Commander Grant will court-martial anyone who says otherwise. But being in charge doesn't mean being superior. It's just a job. And we all have jobs. Mine is security. Nathan's is medicine. That Thraken over there, Korg? He's engineering. The Veldari, her name's Shimmer, she's helping with navigation because her people see in spectrums we can't. Everyone contributes what they can. And if someone can't contribute, if they're weak or injured then we help them until they can. Or we help them anyway because that's what decent people do. Brett gestured to an empty chair. Come on, sit with us. Dinner's in 20 minutes and Rodriguez makes this thing called pizza that you've got to try. Zyra hesitated, then followed him to a table where several crew members were gathered. They made space for her immediately, including her in their conversation without making a big deal of it. They asked her about her world, about her people, and they listened when she talked. Really listened like her words had value. For the first time in 6 years, Zyra felt something dangerous blooming in her chest. Oh. Then the alarm klaxons began to wail, red lights flashing throughout the ship. The crew moved instantly, their casual atmosphere vanishing as they rushed to their stations. Brett was already on his feet, his expression grim. What's happening? Zyra asked, fear spiking through her. Brett checked his comm device, his jaw tightening. Distress call. Human colony, 3 hours from here. Under Korgith attack. Zyra watched as Grant's voice came through the ship-wide speakers, calm but urgent. All hands to stations. We're changing course. Zyra found herself standing outside the bridge, her heart pounding as she listened to the tense voices inside. Through the partially open door, she could see Commander Grant staring at a tactical display, her face carved from stone. We're still 2 days from the nearest Allied fleet, one officer was saying. If we engage, we'll be outnumbered 3-1. Those colonists have maybe 6 hours before the Korgith break through their defenses, another voice added. But Commander, we still have 47 freed prisoners aboard. If we take damage, if we lose the ship. The weight of that decision hung in the air like a physical thing. Zyra understood the dilemma perfectly. The humans could save the people they'd already rescued, getting them safely home. Or they could risk everything to save strangers they'd never met. She knew which choice they'd make. She'd seen enough of humans to understand their nature now. They could not help. It was like asking them to stop breathing. Grant's response confirmed it. Set course for the colony. Maximum speed. And get me tactical options. We're going to need every advantage we can find. Zyra didn't think. She just moved, pushing through the door before anyone could stop her. Every head on the bridge turned toward her, but she kept her eyes locked on Grant. I can help, Zyra said, her voice steadier than she felt. Grant's eyebrows rose. Zyra, you should be resting. My people were infiltrators, Zyra interrupted, taking a step forward. Before the Korgith came, we were pathfinders. We could move through any terrain without being detected. Our size, our agility, our senses, they're all designed for stealth and reconnaissance. She took a breath. I can get inside their ships. Places your people can't reach. Brett had followed her onto the bridge. Commander, she's right. Felictions can access ventilation systems and maintenance shafts that would be impossible for us. If we could get her aboard their flagship, she could sabotage their shields from the inside. Absolutely not, Grant said flatly. Zyra, you've been through enough. I'm not sending you back into danger. You're not sending me anywhere, Zyra said, her ears standing straight up, her tail lashing behind her. I'm volunteering. I spent 6 years being a slave, being helpless, watching others suffer and doing nothing because I was too scared to act. 3 days ago I tried to be brave and I failed. People died because of my failure. That wasn't your fault. Maybe not. But this is my choice. Zyra's claws extended slightly. You humans, you fight for people you don't even know. You risk everything because you believe everyone deserves freedom. Well, I believe that too now. Because you showed me it's possible. So let me fight. Let me be more than a victim. Grant studied her for a long moment, and Zyra saw the calculation happening behind those sharp eyes. Finally, the commander nodded slowly. If we do this, you follow orders exactly. No heroics, no improvising. You do the job and you get out. Understood? Yes, Commander. Brett, get her fitted for a harness and a comm unit. And teach her how to use a sidearm. If this goes wrong, I want her able to defend herself. The next 2 hours were a blur of preparation. Brett took Zyra to the armory where they modified a combat harness to fit her smaller frame. It felt strange having the weight of equipment on her body, the unfamiliar bulk of a pistol at her hip. The safety is here, Brett explained, demonstrating on his own weapon. Red means ready to fire. You point, you squeeze the trigger. Don't jerk it, just steady pressure. The recoil will surprise you the first time, but the harness will absorb most of it. Zyra practiced the motion over and over until it felt natural. Draw, aim, squeeze. Draw, aim, squeeze. You don't have to do this, Brett said quietly. No one would think less of you. I would think less of me, Zyra replied. Besides, you came for me when I was a stranger. How can I do less for others? Brett smiled, something sad and proud in his expression. You're going to fit right in with this crew. The Redeemer dropped out of faster-than-light travel near the human colony, and Zyra's breath caught at the scene before them. 3 Korgoth warships orbited the planet, their weapons hammering the colony's shields. Small defense satellites exploded one by one under the assault. On the planet's surface, she could see the glow of settlements, thousands of lives hanging in the balance. Attention Korgoth vessels, Grant's voice boomed across all channels. This is Commander Lisa Grant of the Earthship Redeemer. Cease your attack and withdraw immediately. The response came in the form of weapons fire. Plasma bolts screamed toward them, and the Redeemer rolled to evade, its own guns returning fire. So much for diplomacy, Grant muttered. All batteries concentrate fire on the flagship. Boarding teams prepare for deployment. Zyra suited up with Brett's team in the shuttle bay. Her hands were shaking, but she forced them steady. Fear was natural. Even humans felt fear. The difference was what you did with it. The shuttle launched into chaos. Space battles on the view screen looked nothing like the sanitized displays on bridges. Out here it was violent and immediate. Ships exchanged fire at ranges that seemed impossibly close. Explosions bloomed in silence. Debris tumbled through the void. Their pilot, a woman named Kelly with nerves of steel, wove through the battle like she was dancing. 30 seconds to the Korgoth flagship. Their shields are fluctuating from the Redeemer's bombardment. We've got a narrow window. The shuttle slammed into the Korgoth hull with magnetic clamps, and Brett's team moved instantly. Plasma cutters opened a breach, and they poured through into a maintenance corridor. Korgoth warriors came running, but the humans met them with coordinated fire that left Zyra stunned. Every human knew exactly where the others would be, moved like they shared one mind. Zyra, you're up. Brett pointed to a ventilation shaft. 3rd intersection, take the left branch, follow it to the core. You'll know the shield generator when you see it, it'll be the biggest thing in the room. Plant these charges on the main power couplings. He handed her a pack of explosives, each one marked with simple instructions that her translator rendered clearly. 15-minute timer once you arm them, Brett continued. That gives you 12 minutes to get back here. We'll hold this position. Can you do this? Zyra took the pack, feeling its weight. I can do this. The ventilation shaft was exactly the kind of space she'd been born to navigate. Too small for humans or Korgoth, it was perfectly sized for a Felixian. Zyra moved through the darkness, her enhanced vision picking out every detail, her sensitive whiskers detecting air currents that told her about the spaces ahead. She could hear Korgoth voices through the walls, barked orders and weapons fire. Her empathic senses, dulled by years of force suppression, came alive again. She could feel the emotions of those around her bleeding through the metal. Anger, confidence, bloodlust, but also something new. Fear. The Korgoth were afraid. Afraid of humans. Zyra reached the shield generator room and peered through a grate. 2 guards stood watch, but they were focused on the door, expecting threats to come from there. She waited, patient as only a pathfinder could be, until they turned away. Then she removed the grate with painfully slow movements and dropped silently to the floor behind a bank of equipment. The generator hummed with power, thick cables connecting it to the ship's main systems. Zyra placed the charges exactly where Brett had shown her, her hands steady now. This was what her people had been. Silent, precise, deadly when necessary. She'd just armed the last charge when one of the guards turned. His eyes widened. Intruder. Zyra ran. Not toward the ventilation shaft but toward the guards. Toward danger. Because running away would lead them to the charges. She needed to be the distraction. The guard raised his weapon, but Zyra was already moving, her body remembering training from when she was young. She rolled under his shot, her claws finding gaps in his armor, and the guard howled in pain. The second guard grabbed for her, and this time there was no escape. His massive hand closed around her body, lifting her off the floor. Little kitten, he hissed. You're far from? Zyra drew the pistol Brett had given her. Her hands didn't shake. She pressed it against the guard's armor seam and squeezed the trigger just like she'd practiced. The recoil jarred her whole body, but the guard dropped her with a roar of pain. Zyra hit the ground running, diving back into the ventilation system as alarms began to wail. Zyra's lungs burned as she scrambled through the ventilation shafts, the sound of pursuing Korgoth echoing through the metal around her. They couldn't follow her into these narrow spaces, but they knew where the shafts led. They'd be waiting at every exit point. Her comm crackled with Brett's voice. Zyra, report. We heard weapons fire. I'm okay, she panted, taking a sharp turn at an intersection. Charges are set. 12 minutes. Good. We're fighting our way to extraction point Beta. Meet us there. But Zyra could hear the strain in his voice, the sound of plasma fire in the background. They were pinned down. She checked her mental map of the ship's layout, a skill that had kept her alive as a slave. There was another route, one that would take her past the Korgoth armory but would let her come up behind wherever Brett's team was trapped. She made the decision without hesitation and changed direction. The shaft opened into a storage area filled with weapons and ammunition. Zyra dropped down silently, her ears swiveling to catch every sound. Empty. She crept to the door and peered through the crack. Brett's team was trapped in the corridor beyond, caught between Korgoth forces on both sides. They'd set up a defensive position, but plasma bolts were chewing through their cover. There were only 5 humans left standing, and one was clearly injured, slumped against the wall while Rodriguez tried to stop the bleeding. Zyra looked at the armory around her. At the weapons. At the power cells stacked against one wall. At the grenades lined up in neat rows. An idea formed, the kind of idea that would have been impossible for the scared slave girl she'd been just days ago. But she wasn't that girl anymore. These humans had shown her who she could be. She grabbed as many grenades as she could carry, primed them all, and threw them into the pile of power cells. Then she ran, diving back into the ventilation shaft and sealing the grate behind her. The explosion shook the entire ship. Metal screamed and buckled. Emergency systems wailed. Through the shaft, Zyra heard the shocked shouts of Korgoth warriors, the sound of a secondary explosion as ammunition cooked off. What the hell was that? Brett's voice came through the comm. Armory, Zyra replied, allowing herself a small smile. The path behind you should be clear now. Go. She heard the sounds of the humans moving, their boots pounding on metal decking. Zyra navigated back through the shafts, following the route to extraction point Beta. She emerged from a ceiling vent just as Brett's team arrived, looking worse for wear but alive. Brett saw her drop down and shook his head with a mixture of exasperation and admiration. I said no heroics. I followed orders. You said plant the charges and get to extraction. I did both. Zyra's tail swished with something that might have been smugness. The armory? Was on my way. Rodriguez laughed despite the blood on her uniform. I like her, boss. The charges detonated exactly on schedule. Through the viewport of their shuttle, racing away from the Korgoth flagship, Zyra watched as the shield generator exploded in a cascade of blue light. The flagship's protective barriers collapsed like a popped bubble. The Redeemer didn't waste the opportunity. Its main guns fired in sequence, precise shots that tore through the now vulnerable ship's hull. Explosions rippled across the Korgoth vessel, and smaller craft began evacuating like insects fleeing a dying hive. The other 2 Korgoth warships, seeing their flagship crippled, broke off their attack and jumped to faster-than-light speed. Within minutes, the battle was over. The colony was saved. Back aboard the Redeemer, Zyra found herself in the medical bay again. Nathan checked her over with practiced efficiency, tuteing at a few bruises and a minor burn on her arm. You're becoming a regular visitor, he said, applying a salve. Though I'd prefer if you visited socially instead of as a patient. I'll try, Zyra promised. Commander Grant entered, and this time Zyra noticed the entire medical bay seemed to stand a little straighter. The commander approached with something in her hand, a small patch of fabric with the Redeemer's insignia embroidered on it. That was good work out there, Grant said. Quick thinking, solid execution, and you saved lives. Brett tells me you modified the plan on the fly to help the team. I just did what needed doing, Zyra replied, feeling suddenly shy under the praise. That's what good soldiers do. Grant held out the patch. We'd like to offer you a position on the crew. Official. With rank, pay, and all the responsibilities that come with it. You'd be our scout and infiltration specialist. Training provided, of course. Zyra stared at the patch, at the symbol of the ship that had saved her life. The ship that had shown her a different way to live. I don't have any formal training, she said quietly. I was just a child when my world fell. Everything I know, I learned as a slave trying to survive. Then we'll teach you the rest, Grant said simply. But you already have something we can't teach. Courage, determination, and a desire to help others. That's what matters most. Zyra took the patch with trembling hands. Yes, I accept. Over the following months, Zyra became an integral part of the Redeemer's operations. She trained with Brett's team, learning human combat tactics and strategy. She studied ship systems with the engineers. She practiced medicine with Nathan so she could provide first aid on missions. But more than that, she learned about humanity's vision for the galaxy. She sat in on diplomatic meetings where humans negotiated with other species, offering alliances based on mutual respect rather than dominance. She watched as they freed more slave ships, each rescue adding to a growing network of liberated peoples. Word spread across the sector. The humans who fought for strangers. The humans who believed in freedom for all. The humans who refused to accept the galaxy's brutal hierarchies. And with that word came change. Species that had accepted their subjugation for generations began to question it. Slave revolts broke out on Korgoth worlds, inspired by stories of human rescues. Smaller nations that had paid tribute to avoid conquest reached out to Earth, seeking protection and alliance. The Korgoth Empire, facing unprecedented resistance, began to fracture. Their warrior culture had no response to an enemy that valued every life equally, that fought not for conquest but for liberation. They'd built their power on fear and cruelty, but humans fought with something stronger. Hope. 6 months after her rescue, Zyra stood on the bridge as the Redeemer responded to another distress call. This time it was a Felixian transport under attack. Her heart clenched when she heard her people's language over the comm. How many? Grant asked. 37 Felixians in the slave hold, the sensor officer reported. Grant looked at Zyra. Want to lead this one? Zyra touched the patch on her uniform, the symbol she'd earned through sweat and courage. Yes, Commander. The rescue went smoothly. Zyra was first through the breach, her people's language flowing easily as she reassured the terrified captives. She broke their chains herself, meeting their shocked expressions with calm certainty. You're free now, she told them in their native tongue. And I'm going to teach you what humans taught me. That we don't have to accept the galaxy as it is. That we can make it better. That every thinking being has worth and deserves dignity. One of the freed Felixians, a young male barely older than Zyra had been when she was taken, stared at her with wide eyes. But we're weak. The Korgoth destroyed our world. What can we possibly do against them? Zyra smiled and gestured to Brett and his team, who were helping the other captives to their feet with gentle hands. Alone? Maybe nothing. But we're not alone anymore. The humans showed me that strength isn't just about weapons or physical power. It's about refusing to accept injustice. It's about standing up even when you're afraid. It's about helping others even when there's no benefit to yourself. She guided them toward the shuttle, where more humans waited to welcome them aboard. The Korgoth thought they'd broken us. They thought they'd destroyed everything we were. But they were wrong. We're Felixians. We were pathfinders once, scouts and explorers. And we can be that again. Different maybe. But not less. Back on the Redeemer, Zyra watched as the freed Felixians were processed, given medical care, offered choices about their futures. Several asked to stay to learn to fight. Brett found her in the observation deck, staring out at the stars. Feeling nostalgic? Feeling grateful, Zyra corrected. She turned to face him. Do you remember when you found me? I was waiting to die. I'd given up. Accepted that the galaxy was cruel and nothing would ever change. You were wrong, Brett said with a grin. I was wrong, Zyra agreed. The galaxy is still cruel in many places. But it doesn't have to stay that way. Because humans came along and refused to accept the rules everyone else followed. You showed us that change is possible. We had good students, Brett replied. You Felixians are natural scouts. We're going to need that skill as we push deeper into Korgoth territory. Zyra's ears perked up. More rescues? Always more rescues. The intelligence we've been gathering suggests there are thousands of slaves still in Korgoth hands. Maybe tens of thousands. We can't save them all overnight, but we can start. Then let's start, Zyra said, her tail swishing with determination. She looked out at the stars again, but this time she didn't see a cruel, uncaring universe. She saw possibility. She saw hope. She saw a galaxy that could be better, that would be better because humans had arrived and decided that every life mattered. And she saw herself, no longer a victim or a slave, but a warrior fighting for that better future. The little alien kitten who'd once closed her eyes and waited for death had opened them to find a new purpose. And she would spend the rest of her days making sure no one else had to suffer as she had. That was the human way. And now it was her way too.